No, no. I think no, I think no.
So welcome back, and we are starting again now. We are very happy to have Jonas Vickers, that is an expert in causality, that you got a bit of a flavor of causality in the keynote. And yeah, he's kind of the first person that I met in science. We share an office long time ago, and since then has done tons of work, has really published extensively, and has become somehow one of the experts in causality. So without further ado.
Thanks, Manuel. So hello from my side. I'm super happy to be here. It seems to be a very nice place, and I'm enjoying it so far. So we'll talk about causality, and first, short disclaimer. So this is by no way sort of all my ideas that I present, and I may be a bit sloppy with the references, so I thought I'd do this at the beginning. So Judea Pearl is really one of the persons who started this field, who formalized a lot of things, a lot of questions. These are people from CMU, for a funny reason, in the philosophy department, Peter Spertus, Clark Limmer, so maybe you've heard about the PC algorithm, so these people gave their names, the first letter of the first names. They are sort of a strong driver in the field. Then you may have heard about Donald Rubin, who's famous for the potential outcome framework. So we will hear a bit about structural equation models that goes more into the direction of the language from Judea Pearl or Jamie Robbins, with a lot of statistics, a couple of others as well. So first of all, the most important thing for me is that you really interrupt at any time, and I've seen in the last lecture that you tend to do so, and this is very good. So I've prepared a lot of slides, but there's no problem whatsoever if we don't manage to go through half of them. So I will start with an experiment. So I thought about developing 4 steps into causality, and now you're the first people who will try these first 4 steps with. So let's see whether they make sense. So 4 steps into causality. This is the first step. So consider the following problem. So we are given, this is a fake data set, but you will see a real data set later on that is of a similar flavor. So let's say we have some phenotype that we measure and the activity, let's say the expression level of some gene. And here you see that the activity of this gene A is relatively strongly correlated to this phenotype. And you're doing a measurement of the same phenotype, but with a different gene. Let's call this gene B, and again you have a strong correlation. And now the question is as follows. So we heard that a lot of machine learning is about prediction, and this is again a prediction problem, but of the following type. So the question is, what is the best prediction of the phenotype if you delete this gene? Okay, so deleting really means you're cutting out the gene, it's not there anymore, so it should be not expressed. So in a way the activity is set to 0. And now the question is, what is the best prediction of the phenotype? And you can ask this like for this gene A and for this gene B. Okay, that's step number 1. That's considering the problem. Step number 2 is causality matters. So what do I mean by this? So if you know, and this is now intuitively, we will try to formalize these things later on. So if you know that gene A is really a cause for the phenotype, what does it mean? At least intuitively, it means if we change gene A dramatically, so if we are setting the activity down to 0, then also the phenotype decreases, right? And these are now including standard confidence intervals of 95%, but in a way, this is the best prediction for the phenotype that you had. So it says you're decreasing the activity of the gene A, and also the activity of the phenotype goes down. So this is your best prediction. But, and here it's sort of exactly the same correlation, but we have now a different causal structure. So here we might have that gene B and phenotype are strongly correlated, but this is causally due to a hidden common cause that we sometimes call a confounder. So this might be a different gene, that's called gene C, and this influences both the activity of gene B and the phenotype. So what happens then if you delete gene B? What happens to the phenotype? Well, nothing, right? So it does what it always does, which means that the phenotype is sort of doing, you expect the phenotype to be in this range, right? So because if you change the value of B, you're really deleting it, this gene, then the phenotype does what it always does. What do we take home from this? In a way, so we are doing a prediction, and this is slightly different from what you usually see or what I've seen in statistics or machine learning classes, because this is now a prediction in a different distribution, and this will become very important later on. But here, so the take-home message is causality matters. So if you don't believe in the sort of concept of causality and you think this is all philosophy or whatever, or it's all a bit voodoo, then that's fine. But this also means you cannot solve this problem. So if you don't believe in causality or if you're not willing to take a causal language, then the best thing that you can do in this situation is I do not know. Right? So here causality matters, and this is sort of the example. We are almost there. So now we are wondering about, okay, so how can we formalize this? What is a causal model? And this is step number 3. And so if you are willing to give me 3 minutes of attention, please let it be the next 3 minutes. Because if you're sort of taking home this slide, I think that's already a good start to what you can keep in mind. Okay, so somehow, what is a causal model? A causal model now should satisfy a couple of properties. So usually, you can start looking at this edge at first. Usually what we're doing in machine learning, we are modeling a distribution P. And this is something that also a causal model should be able to do. So this corresponds to this cloud of data points. So somehow we need a model for this distribution P. But, and now this is the special thing about causality, a causal model should also be able to model a different kind of distribution, and this is what we will call interventional distributions. And this is exactly the question about what happens if we are deleting gene A, for example. So this is what we call an intervention, and this is a different distribution from the distribution that you observe. So here you may call this P, and these interventional distributions you may call Q. So now what's super important, a causal model should be able to model both of these things. Then something that is quite convenient to have is a causal graph, because this is somehow a very nice way of depicting things, and I've also used in the last slide, I've also used these causal graphs, so somehow it would be nice if a causal model outputs a causal graph as well. Sort of the fourth outcome, and I'm not, so unless you convince me otherwise, but I'm not planning to spend a lot of time on this, these are counterfactuals. So this is also something that sometimes comes out of a causal model, so we will look at structural equation models, and there you can also develop counterfactuals. I'm not spending too much time on this for a reason, because parts of counterfactuals you can never check in reality. So therefore I would recommend, so whenever someone is trying to sell a causal model you on the street, ask them whether it has these 3 properties, so that it can induce a distribution P, some interventional distributions, and a causal graph. And if it doesn't have these properties, send the guy away and don't buy it. Okay, so this is really the most important part. Is this clear? Very good. So now, of course, we don't know what a structural equation model is, and I will try to explain this later on. So this is step number 3. Step number 4 is what are current questions that are being asked in the research community? And I mean, this is an incomplete list, of course, but I thought it would be nice to get a flavor of sort of these example questions. So one is how to compute interventions. So imagine someone, you have knowledge about a causal model, and you know these interventional distributions, but you know that you can somehow compute them, but maybe the situation is slightly different. So maybe you don't observe some variables. So maybe you don't have complete knowledge about the causal model, or maybe you only know the distribution and the causal graph, and you then still infer something about the interventional distribution. So these are things that we will also have a look at, and these are also questions that are studied in the famous book from Julia Pearl, for example. So here, what if there are hidden variables, things become arbitrarily complex, and these are questions that you can study. Then another question is, what are nice graphical representations? So I will show you, sort of in a very easy situation, I will show you how to draw causal graphs, but of course, if you have hidden variables or cycles, things become a bit more complex. Then this is something that I already mentioned, can we test counterfactual statements? In general we cannot, but parts of them we can test in data. And then something that I spend a lot of time thinking about is, can we infer the graph structure? So now, I mean, if someone tells you the causal model, then these things may become easy, but what happens if you're only given the distribution P and let's say a few of these interventional distributions, can we somehow infer the causal structure, the underlying causal structure? So this is what is often referred to as causal discovery. And maybe coming to the last talk, I mean, so I really liked the talk, so there, people stress a lot about, or put a lot of attention on prediction problems, right? And so what I like about the field of causality is that you have these problems as well, we'll see some of them, but there are also some fundamental questions that are not solved yet, and you can write a lot of, I think, also very nice papers about this. So thinking about, I mean, what are like fundamental objects that you can place here? What are their properties? So you can study them, and even not looking at data, there are interesting research questions that are studied. Good. These are the 4 steps in causality. So now you can start your PhD if you like. So I will give a few more details about, in the first part, about defining such a model and looking at questions whether you can compute these interventional distributions. Any questions so far?
Repeat counterfactuals.
Yeah, okay, so what is a counterfactual? So there's a Big Bang Theory episode about this. I don't know whether you've seen it. I have it on my laptop. If you need a break of 5 minutes, I can show it, the scene. So what is a counterfactual? So mathematically, I can come back to this question. Intuitively, what is it? So imagine you are, I don't know, playing blackjack, and you have a hand, and you see the cards, and you decide to, I don't know, you compute the chances of winning, and you say, I need an ace of spades, the probability is too low, so that I have good chances, so I stop playing. So then you see that the next card opens up, and it's an ace of spades. And somehow, in many situations, we would think, shoot, I should have continued playing. Because if I had continued playing, now my chances would have been good. The question is whether now it's sort of a useful statement or not, because maybe you did the optimal thing before, right? But a counterfactual is, so this is where the name comes from, counter to the fact. It says, what would have happened if I had made a different decision earlier? Or, classical example from textbooks, you are sort of taking a pill, and your headache doesn't go away, and then you're asking, what would have happened if I had not taken the pill? And some of these, I mean, somehow psychologically, this seems to be super important. I like the example of football matches. So the Wembley goal, for example. It was very close, right? So Germany almost won, but I mean, somehow it's like, we always say, if the referee wouldn't have been Swiss and he could have communicated with the Russian line judge. By the way, it was a Russian. This is a bit funny because Germany won against the Soviet Union. But anyhow, this is a different story there. But somehow we seem to attach a lot of sort of psychological meaning and emotions to these counterfactual statements. Okay, but again, this is a different discussion. So in terms of formal theory, I can tell you a few more details how to compute them. In terms of whether you can check them in reality, this is a very different question. Good. Okay, so now what I will do is I will show you some examples. Some of them you may have seen before, but to give a flavor where these causal questions are important, and some of the examples we will see later on. This is by now a classical slide already, but it's still a nice one, I think. So what you see is for different countries in the world, you see the chocolate consumption in kilograms per year per person, and on the y-axis you see the number of Nobel Prize winners. Very strong correlation. There are a couple of interesting facts here. So one that I think is nice is that Sweden is an outlier. You can think about what this means. And also I lived in Switzerland for quite some time, and the Swiss chocolate indeed is better than the German one, I have to admit. Okay, so here the obvious question is, of course, well, this is a correlation. So what happens, and I was surprised, it takes like the first Google hits show these results. So this is a study saying eating chocolate produces Nobel Prize winners, studies published by confectionerynews.com. You can also find, this is a bit surprising, I think you can also find the reverse causal direction. So here geniuses are more likely to eat lots of chocolate from Forbes, which I think is particularly funny because these few Nobel Prize winners really have to eat a lot of chocolate to boost the average consumption, I think. Okay, this is a more classical example. So this is really like, I read this paper once, a very interesting study, I think, from 50, this is about smoking and lung cancer. So there, it was early on, people found out that there's a correlation between the amount of cigarettes you smoke and the risk of getting lung cancer. And they really did a very good study, I think. So according to their Times, they tried their best of doing the statistics correct. This is some data I don't know, you don't have to look at the details. Basically what you see is that there are some people, so here these are lung cancer controls, and you see the more cigarettes you smoke, the higher the risk is. These are quite a few of cigarettes you smoke over your life. And there the question is, of course, now what is the causal explanation for this? So then people started, like politicians started to say, well, we have to sort of ban smoking or introduce a tax. What do you think? What did the tobacco industry say? I mean, first they could say, well, this is like this. I don't know. This is maybe only people under stress smoke, and also people under stress will develop lung cancer. So it's really not due to the smoking. And this is what I meant by a good study. In this journal, they tried to account for as many variables as they could. So for sex of the person, for stress whatsoever, and they always found this correlation. So what did the tobacco industry say?
They say that people smoke because they have cancer and they were stressed.
Yeah, very good. That's what. So yeah, I always like to say you would get quite a bit of a bonus if you would work in the tobacco industry, but you wouldn't be like getting the highest bonus. So this is a good explanation or a good argument why, because they just reverse the causality, but you can also counter this fact because again in the study they show that they develop lung cancer after they smoked, have been smoking. Some more people wanting a bonus? Yeah.
There's a hidden genetic factor that makes you want to smoke and that gives you lung cancer.
Brilliant. Why is this brilliant? This is in 1950. You cannot check, you cannot measure this, right? So you're receiving the highest bonus. There's a very nice book describing these things. It's called Merchants of Doubt. It's very interesting. It's a nice book you should read. The same people discussing lung cancer also had some opinion about climate change later on. So there are these people who are always trying to find explanations for these scientific facts. Good. So we have already heard, so this is the genetic factor, right? So here, if this is the explanation, so if a gene is, a single gene, if it's expressed, causes like an increased desire of tobacco and also the increased risk of lung cancer, then you get the correlation, but of course it doesn't help if you stop smoking. A different example is myopia, also a nice one I think. So apparently, so there are these room lights for small children, so these are the lights you put in a plug and then it's not as dark, so that the small children are not as afraid during the night. And what the study showed is whenever there was a room light, the risk of developing myopia, which I think is short-sightedness, is strongly increased. What do you do with this? If you're statisticians, you may ask, well, is this statistically significant? In this case, it is. If you're a scientist, you may ask for the reason. So here, this is a part of the paper. So they're really saying the strength of the association does suggest that the absence of a daily period of darkness during childhood is a potential precipitating factor in the development of myopia. Of course, they don't use the word cause, but this reads pretty much about it. But so if you're a person who wants to earn money, you're developing this. So this is a patent on a night light with sleep timer. So you put this into the plug, and then it's like it produces some light for an hour, and then it goes off so that the child can fall asleep, but then it doesn't suffer from short-sightedness. And of course, this assumes that there's a causal link, right? So it assumes that if does the nightlight sleep timer help, and it assumes yes, because the nightlight is really a cause for the short-sightedness. This is an example that I would like to show. It's also a famous one. It's called Simpson's paradox, and this we will use later. So this is about kidney stones. There are two different types of treatments for kidney stones. Treatment A, let's call them treatment A and treatment B. And you have about 700 patients with kidney stones, and half of them get treatment A and half of them get treatment B. So you see the result of this study, and then you're wondering, well, which treatment shall I take? And it looks like treatment B is performing better than treatment A. But there are millions of studies like this, so why did this become important? Because of this reason. So you can sort of distribute the patients into two classes. So there are small kidney stones and large stones, and as you can imagine, The large stones are the more severe case. So they are, oh sorry, these are recovery rates, I should have said. So these are the more severe cases, so it's less likely that you recover. And now what is a bit funny about this example is that treatment A performs better than treatment B in both subgroups, both for small stones and for large stones, but yet it performs worse in the overall data set. This is called Simpson's paradox. Any intuitive explanation for this? Can you speak up?
The number of individual per group, which in this case for treatment A is way larger for large stone with low probability of recovery, and in the other case is low.
Yes, so I just repeat what you said so that everyone hears this. So treatment A had to deal with many more of the difficult cases, right? So this number is much larger than this number. So treatment A got all the difficult cases, treatment B got all the easy cases, so it only looks like treatment B is better than treatment A. But indeed, it is treatment A. And we will see this later on to make this a bit more formal. So here this is the underlying ground truth. So what happened, and we know this, so the treatment has an influence on the recovery, and so does the size of the stone. So the large ones are more difficult to sort of cure, but also the size of the stone had an influence on the treatment. And why? Because the doctors saw patients coming into their house, and then they saw, oh, this is a difficult case, but I want to help the patient, and I think that treatment A is better than treatment B, so if it's a severe case, I'm more likely to give treatment A. So this is what happened in practice. So this is the sort of the data that we have, but we are interested in a different question. So here, this, like, in a way, this is our data generating process, but we are more interested in questions like, well, what is the expected recovery if all the patients get treatment B? And then we may want to compare this to what is the expected recovery if all get treatment A. And this is what we will see as an interventional distribution. So we get data from this distribution, but we are interested in a different distribution, namely one where the treatment does not depend on the size anymore. This example clear? Good. Advertisement, so only very briefly, we have heard a lot about this, so I don't know whether you can read this. So this is Bing from yesterday, so if you plug in Cadiz Beach swimming pool, swimming hotel, you get some ads. So I used AdBlock for quite some time and I was surprised how many ads you get. So these are the ads in the main line, so you get this small gray AD, this is an ad, this is an ad, this is an ad, this is a sidebar, and at least when I was working a bit on advertisement, those things make much more money than those ones. So these are the important ones in terms of revenue, if you like. I don't know whether you can see this. The images are a bit funny, so you get also a person swimming and the shark behind the person. I don't know how this is related, hopefully not so much. So what's the situation here? I will just briefly talk about this. So this is a super easy causal model for this advertisement program. So you have the user intention that is hopefully unknown to companies like Microsoft or Google. Then you have some data that is provided. This is like the search query, the IP address, time of the day, whatsoever. And then you have this parameter mainline reserve that determines how many ads do you show on the mainline. So these are the ones you saw 3 on the last slide that appear above the search results. And then this determines a lot of other factors, the number of ads that are shown in the mainline, and then you have a click on this ad or not. And now what is causal about this, so this is what you can now sort of introduce a system and let it run and you get a lot of data, but then you may also ask, well, this is the distribution P, but maybe you're also interested in a different distribution that's called, let's call it Q, namely, you're interested in a question, well, how do we choose an optimal mainline reserve, right? And you can ask this differently, saying that what would happen if I sort of choose the mainline reserve differently? So it still depends on the user data, but maybe with a different conditional. And this is also an example for an interventional distribution, and therefore this can also be seen as a causal question. It's a super interesting problem, advertisement. But still, I hope that not more than half of the next generation of very talented machine learners and statisticians, as you are, I guess, work on advertisement placement. So I will also show some other examples. But I agree, it's an interesting problem. This is a problem from science. This is a real data set that we looked at recently. So what do you see? And this is very close to what you saw at the beginning. So you have gene expression data sets. This is for yeast. I think it's the last example, and then he starts doing some theory. So you have about 6,000 genes. You have some observed data, and this is what you can think of in observational distribution P. So this is what you see here, a small part of it. So for 2 genes, you see the joint distribution. You see there's a correlation between these genes. And then you can be wondering, well, what happens if I now knock down, or in this case really delete this gene? What happens to this gene number 4710? And this is what you see on the right-hand side. So here the activity goes down. It's a logarithmic scale. And also the activity of this gene goes down. And in this case, it's in sort of, you can think of this being an interesting pair, because this really means that there's a causal effect, maybe an indirect causal effect from this gene to this gene. There's one sort of comment I would like to make with the picture in the middle that becomes important later on, and this is something about stability. So what do you see here? So in total, this is one deletion data point, right? So here we deleted this gene, but in this data set we have lots of different gene deletions. So not one, but about 1,500. Sorry. And they are plotted in the middle. So these are all the orange data points. So these are 1,500, these are 160. So what do you see now? And this is a bit surprising, I think. So we see that there's still sort of a dependence between these genes. These are the same genes that are plotted, right? And it's exactly the same dependence. And this is something that we will exploit later on. And one way to look at it is to say, well, if you're trying to predict this gene, 4710, with this gene, then somehow, if you're using a causal gene like this one, this seems to be a stable prediction. So it's the same model, both in the observational data and in a lot of different distributions that are all pooled here. Okay, this is a bit vague maybe, but you keep this in mind and see this, I think, tomorrow again. So this is the sort of the intuitive thing here. Causal relationships are often stable. Good. Enough of examples, I think. So this is the first part, causal language and causal reasoning. So now, if I could ask you to really try to keep this picture from the beginning in mind. So a causal model should output observational distributions and interventional distributions. And I will show you now the concept of structural equation models. There are other concepts that work also well, but here we decided to look at structural equation models. So that's the picture again. Okay, so first definition. What is a structural equation model? It's something super simple. So it's formally a collection of equations. Okay, so we are trying to construct a model for, let's say, 4 variables, x1 to x4. And what is a structural equation model? It's just a collection of 4 equations. Okay? So x1, for example, is a function of x3, and now we have these variables that I denoted with n. These are noise variables. Okay, so formally you have these 4 equations, and you're also given a noise distribution, so a distribution over these variables n. Okay, so what do we have to assume? So for now we assume the n's to be jointly independent, and we assume that the corresponding graph has no cycles. What is the corresponding graph? So how do you construct a graph, right? This was one of the links. This you do in a very intuitive way. So you take one of these equations, like let's say the first one, and then you see, aha, x1 is a function of x3 and some noise. So what you do in the graph, you just draw an edge from x3 to x1. So you always draw an edge from the variables on the right-hand side to the variables on the left-hand side. Super easy, right? So now the first question. So why does this induce an observational distribution? So why does this, I think it's even stated here, so why does a structural equation model induce an observational distribution over these variables? Let's say x1 to x4. How can you see this? Or how can you prove this? So what is a structural equation model? It's really like these equations and then a noise distribution. So for example, you can think of n1 is a Gaussian distribution 0, 1, and 2 is a uniform distribution between -3 and +3, and 3 is a chi-squared distribution, and then 4 is again the Gaussian 0, 1. So how do you use this model to generate an observational distribution? Yeah? An idea?
Yes, you start by generating it, which only depends on the noise, and then
Exactly, very good. So I repeat. So you start with nodes that don't have any parents. So you start with x3 because this only depends on noise. And you can think of a computer program. So if you would write a code that tries to generate samples from this distribution, you would do exactly this. So you start with variables that don't have any parents. So you start with x3, you sample from the noise distribution, plug it in this function, and then you have your data point or your sample for x3. And then you go to the next variable, let's say x1. x1 only depends on x3. For x3 you already have the sample, and it depends on some noise, so this you can generate because you know the distribution, and then you have the sample for x1. So now what is super important here is that this graph doesn't have any cycles, because this means you can really have a node that starts somewhere. So you can relax this assumption, but for us it's not important now. Is this clear? We're almost there, because if I go back 2 slides, now we know a causal graph, this was trivial, and the distribution, this was also maybe not trivial, but hopefully not too difficult. Okay, 2 out of 3. So you're almost willing to give me money for this model, I think. Okay, and now what about the third one? Now we have to sort of generate interventional distributions, and how can we do this? This is the whole trick. So we are starting with an observational distribution, or with a structural equation model, and now in order to sort of model interventional distributions, we just say, well, the thing what you can do is you can replace some of these equations. That's all what it is. So here, so if you think about the gene expression, for example, you are interested in deleting one variable, right? So let's just say the gene A was, before it was regulated by something else and there were a lot of incoming errors, and now you're saying, no matter what, I just delete this gene, so it's not there anymore. So what I do is, I just replace the structural equation and set it to 0. This is the activity of the gene. Now it doesn't depend on anything else anymore, I just cut it out. And this is how we model an intervention. So you just replace one of these structural equations. So then, of course, the 100 euro question, well, does it still induce a distribution? Yes, but a different one maybe, right? So we still don't have any cycles. So usually we have even less edges, right? So it's a new graph. It's like a new set of equations. The distributions here may stay the same or not. But so what you get is you get a different distribution. And this is what we call an interventional distribution. Yes? What about integrating out instead of setting it to 0? This is a very good question, and this is different. So why is this different? Think about the distribution of x2, for example, right? So if you are, so this is the observational model again. So x2 has some distribution, right? And as you have seen before, this depends on the distribution of x1 and x3. So now if you're integrating out the variable x1, then x2 still has the same distribution, right? The same marginal distribution. But the point is, in interventional distributions, that is not necessarily the case. It would be a pity if this is the case, because we know that smoking is causing lung cancer, so if you want to change the distribution or the risk of getting lung cancer, integrating out would be to say, I just don't care whether I'm smoking or not. But this is not going to help you. You still have the same risk of getting lung cancer. What helps you is to say, well, I really stopped smoking. And this is an intervention. So this is why integrating out would, for example, not change the distribution of x2, but in this case, setting x1 to 0 would really change the distribution of x2. Okay, so this is a formal concept, and we will try to see this in practice later on. But is this, at least formally, the idea is clear? Start with a structural equation model, replace one of these structural equations, and then you have an interventional distribution. So this is again the observational distribution here. You can perform a different intervention. So here you can set this variable to 0. That's also fine, of course. And this is yet another of these distributions that I called Q before. Okay, so what is with the example? I have to look at the time. Is the time somewhere? Okay, so maybe I'll say something about this and then we do a 5-minute break or so. So this is now again the same, like a structural equation model for the example of the kidney stones, right? So we have a variable, let's call it R, that is the recovery, and that somehow depends on the treatment and the size, right? So here treatment has an influence on the size of the stone. Treatment, as we saw in this data set, also depended on the size. Okay, so this is the structural equation model for the kidney stones data set. And now, what are we interested in? We are interested in this distribution here. So we are replacing this structural equation by setting treatment to A. So we are wondering what happens if all of them get treatment A, no matter what the size is. And this is just naming. So it's sort of nice to give a name to this distribution, and we often say that this is a do distribution, an intervention distribution, and we denote this by P and then a subscript do T equals A. Okay, so we are setting T to A no matter what, and this is what is called P do T equals A. Okay, so this is the distribution that we are after. And now, so one question, and maybe combine this with the break. So one question you may wonder is, well, can we compute this distribution? I mean, this is a different distribution, right? So we have data. So this is our data set. So let's say this is like, these are really probabilities. This is our data set, and that was generated by this distribution P. But I try to argue at least that we are interested in this distribution. It's a different one. And now the question is, well, can we compute anything from about this distribution? And the answer is yes. And so we are trying to make a small exercise. And if you don't like this, then you can also take a 5-minute break. But I just write down the first 2 lines, and then you can see whether you can continue this. And otherwise, we'll finish this together. So somehow I said, okay, we are interested in this distribution, and what exactly are we interested from this distribution? Any suggestions? A distribution is a super rich object, right? So we are not interested. So what exactly are we interested in? What property of this distribution? Yeah? Yes, very good. We're interested in the mean of the recovery. So let's denote this by this. The expectation of, so we are setting T to A, the expectation of the recovery. Okay? And this, because everything is discrete here, this is the same thing as the probability, T equals A, of recovery being 1. It's the same thing, right? Now I give you one hint, and then you can see whether you can continue this. So this is the same thing as, in this distribution, we are setting T to A, right? T is always A, no matter what. So I don't change the probability here if I just add the statement T equals A. It stays the same thing. So then what I can do is, so I write, oh, hopefully this is not too small here. I can write R equals 1 and T equals A. This doesn't change anything. And now this is the first hint. So what I will do is I will also sum over the size, right? So this is again a probability, so I can put S equals small s here, and I don't change it. This is just marginalization. Okay, so the first step is also trivial. And now, sort of, the question is, how do we continue? And maybe, if you like, take a piece of paper and try to continue. And so now this is really, you need one idea for solving this exercise. So at the end, I would like to have a number here, right? So there should be a number, a probability. So just an idea, how do we approach this? Again, we still have the problem, right? So we have data from this distribution, but now we are interested in this distribution. So this is the wrong P here. As long as you have a do statement in this P, you cannot plug in the data, because the data is something about the distribution P. So now what we have to think about is, how do you, like, what kind of things are exactly the same in this distribution and in this distribution? There are some things that remain what we call invariant. And what is this? So what I propose is we do a 5-minute break now, and people who are interested try to compute these things, and people who are not take a break or a coffee or whatever. So 5 minutes and then we're back.
I guess we should expand the probability using chain rule, but I'm not sure about the other. Like, obviously, probability of recovery given treatment A is the same in both cases, but it's not clear whether it could be enough for that. So like we're scanning to the same size. The probability stays the same. Do you see this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It doesn't change, it's like probability of having small stones, probability of having large stones, and what doesn't change the probability of the success treatment A with respect to particular stones. So then you just don't assume with respect to number of cases, you assume with respect to number of probability of given case.
Well, I guess just expand this joint formula with these conditionals. This conditional coincide with the
Yeah.
head.
Yeah, it's like
This
you,
one as
yeah,
well.
you assume this doesn't change, probability of stones, then you assume probability of treatment doesn't change. It's easy. No, I feel what you should remove. Yeah, I think. Yeah, for me it's confusing why. I think we should remove the I don't know. Okay, we are just interested in that. So we just remove it.
Then you will be conditionally considering the probability from the treatments B as well. And you didn't want
Don't want to consider it. Want to compute only what's forthcoming in the case of A.
yeah, that's
Yeah, if you compute this, then you have a problem. This is what my confusion, right? Because
Okay, I think we can continue.
here we marginalize.
yeah,
Does anyone need more time? Very good. Everyone solved the problem now. So, any suggestions? at least how to proceed? I guess no one has to give the number, right?
Oh.
Does anyone? No.
Okay.
So, okay, you don't count. Okay, so there's one trick that is essential to solve this task, and hopefully it makes sense, because otherwise we have to spend a bit of time on this. Somehow we have to relate this interventional distribution to this distribution that we observe, right? And this is the main trick that you can use. Okay, let's look at this. So in both of these sort of worlds, okay, in the interventional distribution and in the observed distribution, you have that the conditional of recovery given treatment and size is the same. And this you can exploit. So, and where does this sort of main trick come from? And so, please allow me to go back in slides here to the sort of interventions. So, let's look at this example. So now we are intervening on X4, for example. Okay, so this is the observational distribution, and we are intervening. Bam. This is a different intervention. Yeah, this is a different distribution. But now the point is, you're only changing one of those equations. All the remaining ones stay exactly the same as they were, right? So, and this means that the conditionals don't change. So here, if you look at the conditional of x2 given x1, so the way x2 depends on x1. In this distribution, it's exactly the same as in this one. Because this structural equation here, you did not touch, right? So you only replace this one. And this you can exploit. So in our example, for the treatment, so where do we intervene? We are intervening on the treatment, right? So we do not touch this equation here. So this is always the same. So this is the observational distribution, and now comes the interventional one. It's still the same. Which means that the conditional distribution of, like from R given T and S, this is always the same. And this is how these distributions are linked. And that is important, so this is why I spent so much time on this, because otherwise, if this would not be the case, you would be lost. I mean, these distributions, yes, they are different, but they share a lot of common properties, and this is what helps you. Okay, so let's see, in this example, I mean, how can we exploit this? I'm not sure whether, I mean, the board is too small, so that's why I wrote it on a slide. Hopefully it's not too terrible. Let's see. So this is what we saw at the beginning, right? So there's the expected, this is what we want to compute. And then the first step I gave you as a hint. So here we are just marginalizing out, we are adding this t equals a, this we can do because t is always a in this distribution, and then we are marginalizing sort of out the s. And then what you do is you just use the definition of a conditional. So you would like to have an expression like this, right? So r equals 1 given s and t, and why do you like this expression? Because this is something that stays the same in both distributions. So what we are doing is this step is also in a way trivial. It's just saying, well, this is the definition of a conditional distribution. And so now, this is again a trivial step. So now we can use the same trick. So in this distribution, t is always equal to a. So this piece here is sort of the same trick. We're just crossing out the t equals a. It doesn't matter whether it appears or not. And the first part remains the same. It's this step. And now comes the sort of the nice property of these interventions. So this is the super important equality sign. So if you like, look at this. So here it's the interventional distribution of R given S and T, and the interventional distribution of S. And now we can just replace this by the sort of observational distribution, because we know it's exactly the same in both worlds. Okay, and this is how you link these two distributions. And now this is something you can compute, because this you can just read off from the table. And this is for you. So it's 0.832, so this is the expected recovery if everyone gets treatment A, and this is larger than 0.782, which is the expected recovery if everyone gets treatment B, so this is the do T equals B here. And although you don't look like it, I would say there's a bit of magic, because we are really, I mean, we are having data from this distribution, and we are interested in a very different distribution, but we don't have to repeat the experiment, we can just reuse the data. With a bit of calculus. Okay, questions? Yes?
How is this different from evaluating the Bayesian network while putting evidence on it?
A very good question. So, why is this? How is this different from a Bayesian network? So, and an analysis within a Bayesian network. The point is. Okay, so now if I'm confusing you, you go back in time and listen does not listen to what I'm going to say, whatever this means. Okay, so what is a Bayesian network? A Bayesian network tells you something about conditional independencies and independencies, right? So it's a way of you start with a distribution and then you are trying to encode all the conditional independencies in this distribution into the graph. And you can do this. But, so now, if you have a distribution, so this is, I will draw the same graph here. So here, for example, this is our causal graph, right? And you can also view this as a Bayesian network. And you say, well, this encodes some conditional independencies. Namely, this one is none, right? Everything depends on each other. It's a fully connected graph. I can also show you a different Bayesian network that encodes exactly the same conditional independencies, namely this one. It's also a Bayesian network. But now what happens? Now suddenly it says, whenever you are intervening on the treatment, it doesn't have any influence. Right? So it doesn't matter. So somehow you have a Bayesian network and the conditional dependencies in the observational distribution are the same. But the outcome of these interventional distributions are very different. So here the treatment has no effect whatsoever on the recovery. Or I can even make it like this, right? So then the size of the stone doesn't have any effect on the recovery. And that's not true somehow, right? Because in a way we see this this is about a link to reality. So how do we know that not this is the causal graph, but this is the correct causal graph? And this
after doing treatment, after doing the intervention, then inference seems the same as doing inference on the resulting skeleton of the
but what I'm trying to say is so the question is it looks the same, but it's really
inference, just doing that computation.
Yes, but the inference now really depends on the graph structure. Whereas a Bayesian network, if you're really a believer in Bayesian networks, you would say, no, I only care about conditional dependencies, right? So, if you only consider this as being a Bayesian network, you should not distinguish between drawing an edge in this direction or this. But in causality, it does matter. So hopefully, if this is not confusing you, I would like to make one more comment about this. So I don't talk too much about philosophy, hopefully, but so what I do think is important in science, I there support the ideas of Popper, I guess, which says, in a very simplified manner, so whenever you have a model, you should be able to reject this. Right? So reject this model, otherwise it's a bit a funny model. So now, if you think about this picture that I showed you here, so this is also a model of reality somehow, right? So we are saying now, well, this is a model of a distribution, and so can we reject this part? So we have a model about the distribution, let's say we observe some process, and now we're saying, well, this is a Gaussian distribution with mean 0 and variance 1. Now we are getting data from this distribution. Can we reject this model? Or do you know how to do this? Okay, this is a sign that I'm confusing you. So here we have a model, and let's say we have some physical process that we are trying to model. Okay? And we have write down a probabilistic model and say the data points that we receive are an outcome of this probabilistic model. And is there a way to say, no, I really believe that this model is wrong? I would say yes, and this is what we learn in statistics. So there we learn all about this hypothesis testing, right? So this is all about rejecting models. So when you're saying, well, this is a Gaussian 0-1 process, but you see all the data points are positive, and you say, well, this doesn't really look like a Gaussian 0-1. So at some point, receiving more and more data, you can reject this model. This is good. This, I think, is important when you do science. So therefore, this part of the model we can reject, okay, at some point. Now the question is, what about these interventional distributions? We somehow have to link them to reality. So now in the first part, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to teach you the sort of the essentials or the tools how to calculate things, like here in this example of the kidney stones. But from a bigger perspective, you should be wondering, well, this is a model. Is there any chance to reject sort of my predictions under these interventional distributions in reality? And I would say, yes, there is, because sometimes you have the ability to do these interventions, right? In genetic experiments, you can really do the deletions. I mean, what the biologists can do is quite amazing. Or a different kind of intervention that you have seen a lot of times, I guess, are randomized experiments. So there you actively say the treatment doesn't depend on the size of the stone, but the treatment depends on the outcome of a random experiment. So there are doctors who roll some dice, and according to this, they decide the treatment. Historically, it turned out that this was not random enough, because whenever the doctors didn't like the outcome, they would roll the dice again. So then, apparently they introduced a telephone number that the doctors had to call, and then the person would tell them the random number. That was more random somehow. But this is something that you do in practice, right? And this is something that you can use to reject these models. And I'm now saying this because of the question about what's the difference to a Bayesian network. So how can we distinguish between these? I mean, formally we know that if you reverse an edge, then the outcome of these interventional distributions become very different. And I would claim that there's indeed also a way not only to compute these things, but also to evaluate them in practice. And to close this line of thoughts, this is also why I don't like talking too much about counterfactuals, because there I would argue this is not as easily possible. We are not able to go back in time and see what happens with the Venn goal if this wouldn't have counted as a goal. It's just not possible. Okay, so what have we seen so far? So I introduced the structural equation model. We have seen this induce the distribution, a causal graph, and some interventional distributions. And what you did, or at least thought about, with the kidney stone example, you were given this observational distribution, you were given the causal graph, and indeed we were able to compute some of these interventional distributions. So this is what we have seen. Okay, this was this example of the kidney stones. Good. So now I would like to, before going on to a slightly different topic, I would like to sort of show you that there are a couple of open questions as well. So now the first one is something that we can again try to find. Yeah, a question first. Yes, oh sorry, thanks for asking again. So there was a question in the break that I almost forgot, and this was, well, how do we know that this is really the causal graph and it's not even yet another hidden variable that determines both the size of the stone and the treatment? And in this particular example, I think we know that this must be correct because the doctors had very little information about the patients other than just the size of the stone. I think that we know it from the physical.
As an example, I would say there's a common genetic pathway that gives you a higher probability to have a bigger stone and a different kind of personality. So the doctor.
Yes, so the question is what happens if there's a genetic factor that determines the size of the stone and also the treatment. So in this case, it's a very valid question, and you have to be cautious about this. But in this case, it's not a problem because the doctor decided the treatment. So unless the doctor and the patient are not siblings or related to each other, I think this is a bit less of a problem. So here we know it because of the underlying sort of process, data-generated process. In general, this question hints into the direction how can we come up with causal graphs. So in the first part, I would really like to stress the situation where we are given the causal graph, the truth, and tomorrow I would like to talk about how do we find these graphs and what can we say about the existence of hidden variables, for example, which is an important topic. But for now, because I would like to sort of get an idea about how to compute things and so on, I would like to start in a situation where we are given the causal graph. Okay, so now we need your creativity again. And so this is a definition that I would like you to finish. So let's say we're given a structural equation model. And so somehow we have an idea about what it means that something has a causal effect on something else, right? So now the question is whether we can formally define this in the mathematical world. And I would like you to take a minute and think about this. So somehow we would like to define what it means that there's a total causal effect from x to y. And you can use interventional distributions, observational distributions, whatever you like. But I would like to have a mathematical definition. And the good news is that there are a couple of equivalent statements. So there are a lot of correct answers here. A lot of good ones. Yeah?
What's total? Total effect?
Yeah, this is what you should define. I mean, that's, in a way, I mean, it depends on now what you would like to be a total causal effect, and then we can discuss this. So I will propose a definition, and then we can discuss. Maybe yours is even better, or has better properties. Okay, any ideas? Yeah.
I know a concept, but I don't know if it's related.
Okay.
To granular causality.
Okay, let's wait this. Like, can we wait for a minute? Maybe I can comment on this later. So the question is towards Granger causality, and I would like to postpone this question because it's related to time, and here we are not talking about time. Okay, so forget about math. What do you think is a causal effect? So when would you say X has a causal effect on Y? Forget about math for a second. Yeah.
If you modify X, make a determination of X, the parameter, the distribution of Y change.
Yeah, so the suggestion here is if you intervene on X, the distribution of Y change. I think that's a very good one. So what does it mean? So mathematically, how can we define this now?
Maybe the conditional distribution of Y, conditional on X, is the noise. If Y depends on the X.
Okay, so let's see. So here, so the conditional distribution of. Okay, so first of all, I like the statement when we intervene on X, the distribution of Y changes. So now, are you proposing a different concept, or are you trying to formalize this?
No, like the distribution of Y changes in a way which is more similar to the noise.
Okay, but what is the noise here? So the noise in Y, or?
Is that an
Yeah, but there are lots of noise variables, right? So for each variable, we have the noise variable. So which noise would you like to consider? The one in Y or in X?
the one in Y?
Okay. So can you say it one more time? I'm trying to see.
Okay, the distribution of Y changes such that now is more similar to the noise of Y, and is indeed.
Aha, okay. So the distribution of Y afterwards is more similar to the distribution of the noise than it was before. Yes, this is a nice idea if you have a situation like this. So if X is, let's say, causing Y, and let's say Y is alpha X plus some noise in Y, and now if we intervene on X and we set it to 0, then somehow the distribution becomes very close to the noise. Somehow, what I don't like about this, so this is a nice way of thinking, but what I don't like about this is that, so you can also intervene on X and maybe put it to 10,000, right? So this somehow moves it away again. Or you can have very complicated interactions between different variables, and maybe if you intervene on X, Y changes, but maybe it looks even less than a noise variable, because maybe you have some paths that are cancelling out each other. Okay, but in a way, this is exactly the way we should go, and these are just formalizations. So look at this one, the third one. I think this is more or less what you said. So there exists a value such that if you intervene on X, the distribution of Y changes, right? This is exactly what's written here. So there is an X such that if you intervene X and put it to this value, let's say 10,000, then the new distribution of Y is different from what you have seen before. Okay, and this, now what I mean, you don't have to remember this or anything, but what I want to show you is that now this idea, this causal model gives us a way of formalizing things. So now suddenly it's not about, I don't know, using words, English words that you can also do, but here we can now really start doing mathematics. Something else that I would like to draw your attention to is, don't look at the other ones, but it's this one, the first one. So this is an equivalent statement which says, okay, if we randomize X, so we put X to a random value, that's also possible, right? So for some variable n tilde, then X and Y are still dependent. This is an equivalent formalization, and I wrote this down because this is what is used in practice a lot. So this is a randomized experiment, what I said earlier. So this is how society, I would say our society determines whether the drug has an effect on the recovery rate or not. So we are randomizing the drug, and then we see that it really depends on now how much of the drug you got, whether you recover or not. Then we would say, oh, this is a useful drug. Depends maybe on the science. If it really hurts, then maybe it's not a useful drug. But at least there's a causal effect, right? Okay, so this, I mean, I think it's a sort of a genius idea here. So historically, I think it's a nice story. So this was in the 18th century when they first did this. So James Lind, it's apparently the British Navy lost more people through scurvy than to enemy action. And so they didn't really know what scurvy was and how to, I mean, vitamin C, for example, was not discovered. So they didn't know how to cure this. And James Lind was the first person who suggested the randomized experiment. So he took, I wrote this down somewhere because I can't remember. He took 12 soldiers and then he randomized the treatment. And he somewhat thought that it's related to acid. So he took the 12 soldiers and put them into 6 groups. And the first 2 had to drink apple cider every day. The second 2 had to drink vinegar. Then the third group, barley water. The fourth group was a bit more unlucky, seawater, which is also salty or something. The fourth group got some drops of sulfuric acid, which is, I think, less fun. And then the last group got 2 oranges and 1 lemon per day. Aha! And they were the lucky ones. So they were the ones who didn't suffer from scurvy. And they still thought it's somewhat the acid in the orange, they didn't know it's the vitamin C. But this is a randomized experiment, and it's really this. I mean, James Lind didn't write it down like this, but this is a formalization of this. Okay, there was a question, I think, yeah.
Yes, so, but this is, so why we just don't say that Y is independent of X? Or we try to like...
Why don't we just say that Y is independent of X? So here the idea is really that imagine, I mean, okay, so chocolate and the Nobel Prize winners, this is why this is sort of taking this idea to an extreme. They are dependent on each other, right? It's super statistically significant. So there's a very strong relation between the amount of chocolate that is consumed in a country and the Nobel Prize winners. So now you're saying, well, X has a causal effect on Y if they're dependent. Which means in this example you would say the amount of chocolate has a causal, that is consumed in a country has a causal effect on the number of Nobel Prize winners. But if you're willing to say this, then this means that if you're president of a country, you just force your citizens to eat 2 kilograms of chocolate every day, and then you hope that you will produce more Nobel Prize winners. And this is just false. So this is why I think. So this is why these dependencies here. They can come like from many different causal explanations, and you will see some of them. What's really important is that you still see the dependence after randomization. And maybe one last comment. So often we have, and this is also, I mean, I don't know the causal ground truth, you can tell me. But why do we see a dependence between chocolate and Nobel Prize winners? So probably, I don't know, this is my guess. We don't have a causal link here, but it's something related maybe to economy of the country, no? Maybe in rich countries you eat more chocolate, and in rich countries you also invest more time in research and thus produce more Nobel Prize winners. So in many situations you have not a causal link, but you have this what you call a confounder. Now what is the beauty about randomization? If you now, it's difficult to, I guess, implement in the United Nations, but if you now say every country gets a random amount of chocolate eaten per day, then what happens is that you are intervening on the chocolate, right? So this is this interventional distribution. You're saying that the chocolate doesn't depend on anything else anymore, it's just the outcome of the random experiment, so you are deleting this edge, you're randomizing over the chocolate. And then, if you still see a dependence between chocolate and Nobel Prizes, then you know it really must be the chocolate. There's no other way. And this is sort of the beauty of this randomization. It sounds a bit trivial, but I think it's really a very cute idea because you are, no matter what this is, it can be any other variable. By randomization, you are like cutting out all possible links. And this is why it's sort of why I will try to draw your attention to the first line, because this is what we are doing in practice. Yeah.
Condition 1, so this needs to hold for one variable and x. What is the difference between saying that this is true for 1 and then saying that this is true for sufficiently large number of random variables? Because still you might have to find that.
Yeah, this is a technical detail. It's a very good question. So why does it hold for some random variable? And can I simplify the question and ask why can't we write for all random variables?
Maybe belonging to some kind of satisfying some condition, right?
Yes. So the reason is very simple. So imagine that y is a function of x. Let's say n plus some noise. Okay. And now I will draw the function f here. So let's say it looks like this. Oh, I cannot plot. So what happens now is, if you randomize x, so and then you get, I mean, if you draw samples from the distribution, it maybe looks like this, right? So now if you only randomize in this area, then it's sort of it's this dosage response, I think is sometimes called, no? So if you randomize in the wrong area, then you don't see an effect. So if you randomize x, so we would say x does have an effect on y, because here, clearly if you increase x, also y increases. But somehow if you're unlucky and randomize in the wrong area, then you don't see this effect. It's a bit an ugly mathematical detail, but that's, I think, the reason for this. Okay, next question, yeah?
So it seems like this definition is really relying already having the causal graph and the structural equation, because it seems that that's the only way that you can tell that x determines y and not that they're just correlated.
Yes, so this is based, it's a good question, so it says it's based on the structural equation model and therefore also on the graph, and this is very important and this is very true. So here this is given a structural equation model. So this is why it's super important for this first part to have the structural equation model. But again, what I said earlier, and hopefully not confuse not all of you, is that you can link this to reality, right? And what we discussed now is these randomized experiments. And this is an outcome of the structural equation model. So it says maybe, so this is a mathematical thing, right? So it depends on your structural equation model. The answer to this is yes or no. But this is something you can check in practice, because you can do the randomized experiment, at least in many situations, right? So in the for drugs and medication, we can do the randomized experiments, and we just see whether the outcome of our structural equation model holds in practice or not. Yeah?
But in practice, I can be lucky and try an infinite number of nx, and I will always observe independence, but maybe if I don't find the good one to observe non-independence.
Yeah, but okay, that's also a good point. So you're saying, well, you're maybe unlucky in practice, but of course the structural equation model also tells you exactly for which random variables, right? So if you're writing like down a structural equation model, I mean, you even know, it's not written here, but you even know how to randomize, right? So you're saying, okay, set the dosage between, I don't know, 2 milligrams and 100. Yeah?
Sorry. Yeah, if you cannot perform a randomized trial, randomized experiment, the only way you can draw exactly the arrow is making an assumption of reality, or are there other ways to say no, it's not.
If you cannot do randomized experiments, okay. So the question is, what happens if you cannot do randomized experiments? And I would say so. If you can always do randomized experiments as much as you like, I would say then do this. This is a very good way of doing it. Sorry. But in a lot of situations you cannot. In this example for smoking, when you think that something is causing lung cancer, you better not randomize smoking. I mean, people are doing crazy stuff, I think, in terms of very dangerous medication, and they pay people to do this. I mean, to take this medication that they want to check the side effects. But I mean, this is like ethical, from an ethical point of view, it's a bit dubious. In biology, for these genes, for example, you can do interventions, but it's just too costly. You don't want to intervene on 6,000 genes. Or imagine even, we have seen also something about interactions before, right? Everything blows up. So imagine now you have an effect on the phenotype, but only if you intervene on 2 genes. So you can, it's not just not feasible to like perform all these interactions. So what we hope from the causal community, I think, well, maybe I cannot speak for everyone, but what I would hope is that causality gives you, or causal inference, especially what we will see tomorrow, gives you a hint of saying, well, this is the data I have, what's the next experiment I should do? And now, what do? It's related to this first step. If you don't like causality, then you just say, I don't know, just do whatever you like. And I hope that the causal community can somewhat say, well, try these experiments first. And potentially, you have only to be better than random guessing, right? Because if you don't use causality, there's just no way of saying, or of like doing this ranking of experiments. And this is what I hope.
So it's not just about doing, because in the case of smoking and cancer, you don't have an assumption of reality. Because you really don't know whether it's a common cause or it's smoking causing cancer. So you're saying that there are some ways, statistical ways to say, no, it's not a correlation, but it's a causation from smoking to cancer. Right?
Yeah, this we will discuss tomorrow, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so at some point you are also facing this there's no free lunch theorem as you have in also classical regression. So at some point it will boil down to assumptions, and we will get to know some of them tomorrow, and parts of them you can check and parts you cannot check. It's like in regression, I think. Yeah?
Is it correct to say that in the simpler kidney stone example, you fall prey to the Simpson's paradox if you just regress the recovery on the treatment, but the calculations you did are basically equivalent to doing a linear regression of recovery and treatment plus the size of the stone.
Very good point. So the question is, this relates to the kidney stones example. So somehow you figured out, or you have seen this before, I don't know, you just saw now that so this is equivalent of doing a regression on both the treatment and the size of the stone, and then just looking at the effect of the treatment. And this is indeed correct. The point, however, is, this is what happens a lot in practice. I mean, whenever you're trying to, not in all papers, of course, but in many scientific works, what they're trying to do is they're trying to establish a causal link. And then what they're doing is we regress out on all the other variables that we can think of that might have an influence on this. And this is now an important message again, sorry for this, but this can be super wrong. You can, in this example, it's exactly the same procedure, and here it works, but in many other situations it can be very wrong. And so, to give you an example, if you have a causal model that looks like this, and you have some variable z that you want to regress out, if this is the causal structure, then you are messing up completely. So here you should not include z in the model. Whereas if you have a variable that is on the top, then you should include it in the regression. And this is something that, for example, I mean, here you have to believe me, I guess, or maybe you see it, but this is something that you can formalize. This is what Judea Pearl, for example, did a lot. So there's something called the Bechdel criterion that you heard the name, and this appears here. So we are saying, we are calling this okay, so the Bechdel criterion basically says what kind of variables do we have to regress on. Yeah.
But there are kind of ways that the contributions use to retrieve the causal effect of X and Y. I don't know if you're going to cover this, but things like instrumental variables.
Yeah, there's another, I'm not going to talk about this. Yeah, so this is a situation where you know parts of the causal structure, parts of them are hidden, parts of them you know, and then you can try to recover the causal effect. There's a lot of theory behind it, and indeed this is the case. So. Good. So I think I'm slowly running out of time, so I will try to come to a summary. First of all, this is a total causal effect, right? And now we even have an idea about some of the causal effects being strong and some of them are being weak. And this is also something you can try to define. So something that you may want to call a causal strength. And what is a good definition about this? No idea. So you can think about this if you have a good idea, just write a paper about this. This is surprisingly difficult. So also there are some open questions. Good. So sort of to summary the first part, I mean, we already got into the discussion what happens if you don't know the graph and so on. But it's sort of formally what I showed on the slide was really, given the causal graph or given the causal model, what can we do? And so here, this is another side remark. So if you're interested in an IID prediction where nothing changes, so you're always having the same IID distribution P, IID data from some distribution P, then don't worry at least too much about causality. So this is really not the goal of causality. Causality becomes important in this case. So whenever we are interested in the system's behavior under an intervention, so then it becomes important. And so one way maybe to also see this, if you're interested in predicting this random variable y, and this is the true causal graph, no matter who gave you this on the street for 10 euros, whatsoever, just if you're caring about predicting y, you just don't include all the variables that are relevant. You don't care about whether this is a cause or an effect or like, I don't know, related through some other links, right? So it only becomes important when you are interested in what happens under interventions or when you shift the environment, for example. There's a small slight parenthesis here, too much, so I'm not going to talk about this, but there are some properties, so this is only true for 99%, I would say, because there are some properties of the causes that you like. For example, these relations are often simpler than these relations. So when you're regressing y on w on x, what you see in practice is that these models often are simpler than when you regress y on z, and maybe you want to exploit this. But as a first order approximation, I would leave this here. Okay, and this was a structural equation model, right? So this is a set of equations, these random variables, and we can get graphs, observational distributions, intervention, and counterfactuals. And this is like what we have seen. So we had, like in this example, a graph and observational distribution, and we were able to compute interventions. And this is the word I couldn't think of a minute ago. This is called adjusting. So this was the question. So theoretically, you can answer what is a valid adjustment set. And in this case, for the causal effect from x to y, and in this case, it's w and it's not z. So always what you sometimes see in practice, always throwing in as many variables as you can think of is often the wrong thing to do. Okay, and this is even possible if there are some hidden variables. This leads in the direction of instrumental variables that we just didn't discuss here. Okay, that's it. Thanks a lot for your time.
In this case, the treatments, kidney stone size, and outcome. Can you just write up the full distribution as like with the arrows out there, and then two normal probabilities and arrive at the probability of recovery given treatment X?
Okay, so the question is, can we do normal stuff? Do we use this causal things in order, this causal terminology in order to come up with a probability of recovery given treatment A? It's something that I would like to stress, and please think about this. The probability of recovery given treatment A is really not what we are interested in. So please let me go back to this example. Because if you're looking at the data, the probability, because this would be a probability statement about P, right? So what's the probability of recovery if you're given treatment A? And I would claim that's not what we're interested in. Because if you are given treatment A in this distribution P, this means you are much more likely to have a large stone, and this means, oh, the recovery is just this. So this is very different, right? So I mean, I would say that this is not what we're interested in, because it's somehow, this is a weird situation, right? So this is not a good measure for how good treatment A is. Because recovery, probability of recovery given treatment A, this is all messed up by the size of the stone, because now this means, aha, you have a large stone, and then you are less likely to recover. But I would say this is, if you are, so let's say you have a kidney stone, and you want to choose a treatment, which one do you choose? And you don't know the size, then you are not interested in the recovery given treatment. You are interested in what happens if I do treatment A. So you are interested in the interventional distribution. It's a bit crazy. But something what happened when I told this example in the lecture at the university, someone had to, I'm not kidding, someone had to leave during the break because he had stomachache and he had kidney stones. And then he came back next week and he said, I took treatment A. And then he asked what we will talk about next week. This was a bit scary. But I'm glad that you all here.